Hey y'all, Ranger Noah with Mission Tejas here. And yes, what you're seeing on your screen or what you read in the title description, nope, your eyes are not deceiving you. It is time for a tier list. Now, what exactly are we doing here? Well, first off, I want to introduce myself. Like I said, my name is Ranger Noah. I'm the park interpreter for Mission Tejas State Park. Now, there are a lot of different things to do at a state park, and one of the most popular pastimes here is bird watching. Now, bird watching is starting to garner a lot more attention these days. More and more people are starting to realize that our natural resources are more than just they're more than just a nice place to camp or fish to catch, although that's definitely part of the state park experience. But another aspect to it is bird watching. But for those who are either new to bird watching or who haven't been to our park yet, I say yet, some people ask, hey, what kind of birds are out here? What is available for us to view? And so figured one good thing to do is using a tier list. Now, for those of y'all who may not know exactly what a tier list is, what we're going to do is we've got representatives of many of the different families of birds that are found here at Mission Tejas. And what we are going to do is we are going to be ranking these based on different families. Now, I know what you're thinking. How could you rank the birds? They're just living their best life. They're just vibing. Totally understand. And first off, before we get into anything, just want to make it clear that we are not saying these are bad birds for bird watching. That is not what we're doing here. What we're doing here is we are simply taking different aspects that species within these families have that can make it either easier or more challenging to see and identify in the park. And this is specifically for Mission Tejas State Park. Now, how are we going to be ranking these? Well, we've got different criteria that we will be using to determine ease or difficulty in identifying or even seeing these species. One of the first things that we'll be going over is accessibility. Now, there are a lot of different factors behind this. It could be, are they here year round? Is this family mostly comprised of seasonal species, species that are only here, say, during the spring and summer breeding season, or they're overwintering here? It could be behavioral things like how secretive is this family? And yes, these are mostly generalizations, and there will be certain species in different families that are going to be a bit more common or a bit more active and a bit more noticeable. There's all sorts of different things that can affect accessibility, and we will go more in depth into that as we go along. The other criteria we have is ease of identification. Some species are going to be a lot easier to identify based on characteristics that you can see, whether it's behaviors, whether it's colors, whether it's size, or things like that. Some birds tend to hang out in the shrubbery more often than others, and some birds also, let's be honest, look a bit more like other species or even other families of birds. Again, we will get into that. The other category is vocalizations. Some birds will sing or call repeatedly. Some birds have very unique calls or songs, and we'll go into the difference between calls and songs as we go through the tier list. And also, by the way, if you just want to get right to the beginning of the tier list, just cut to this timestamp right there. It should have showed up right there, just so you can get down to the actual tier list. So what we're just doing here is we're introducing how we're doing this and what are the criteria here. Also, I want to make it clear that this is not going to be an exhaustive tier list. There are so many different kinds of families of birds found throughout the state of Texas, and several members of these families and several families altogether don't really have much of a presence at Mission Tejas State Park. Here at Mission Tejas, we are in the heart of the East Texas piney woods. And so there's going to be some families that just don't really show up here. We don't exactly have a lot of chichalicas out here. And there's not a lot of seagulls out here either. Also, there are some bird families that are very present here, but let's be real, for time constraints, we have kind of compiled about 18 different families that all show lots of different aspects to the variety of birds that can be found out in the woods or on the plains or on the seashores, wherever you're at. And there's going to be several families that are not represented in this video. But if you want to see another video or we kind of get into some of the families that are not represented here, just let us know in the comments section. Also, if you want to see other state parks provide their own site-specific bird watching lists, or maybe if you want to see tier lists on different things like maybe fishing or something like that, just let us know in the comments. But yeah, vocalizations is going to be the other category because sometimes, as many of y'all have probably already figured out, if you're out in the woods or just anywhere and you hear something off in the distance and maybe you're talking to somebody, maybe you were distracted, and maybe you weren't quite paying attention, you hear something like, what was that? And it doesn't repeat itself. It's really hard to remember exactly what it was that you heard. That's why families of birds that have species in them that have continuous songs or things like that are going to rank higher in terms of vocalizations. And some families that do not vocalize much are going to score a little lower. Again, just want to reiterate, this isn't that these are bad for bird watching. We're simply ranking this on, abundance and ease of identification. And finally, a final criteria that we're going to use for this, this is where it gets very subjective. Now, tier lists inherently can be very subjective, and people are going to disagree. You may agree with this tier list, or you may not. If you feel like, if you have a different opinion saying, what, this family is only A tier, they're personally an S tier for me, that is completely valid. And that is the thing. I'm basing this off of observations that we have seen here at Mission Tejas State Park, and also on some of the appeal or the, not necessarily the demand, just the interest that visitors have. They ask, hey, where are the Viros, or what kind of woodpeckers do you have out here? Things like that. Also, for those of you who are interested in bird watching and also are interested in coming to Mission Tejas, whenever you come here, we offer a bird watching checklist. And it's actually this checklist that I mostly will be basing the order of the families on. We will be working from waterfowl on downwards. Now, there are some families in this tier list that are not on the checklist. Why are they on the tier list? We'll get into that. And there are some families that are on the checklist that are not in the tier list. Again, it's just kind of time constraints. And again, if you want to see more, just let us know in the comments. And real quick, for those of y'all who are kind of new to taxonomy and all that, we are ranking these based on families, and we are ranking them based on the species in this family that are mostly seen here at Mission Tejas State Park. And I will be giving good examples of most commonly seen species in these families. Now, with that being said, let's get right into the tier list. Okay, so starting off with our tier list, and as we go into it, I will open up with the scientific name of the family, but we'll be going into what birds are exactly in this family and the different things that you can use to differentiate between them. First off, we're starting off with Anatidae. This is the duck and goose family. Now, all throughout Texas, there are so many genera, that's genuses, just genus plural. There are so many different kinds of ducks and geese found all throughout the state. Winter is a fantastic time for watching ducks and geese here in Texas. Now, here's the thing. Here at Mission Tejas State Park, there is not a lot of water features. We have the San Pedro Creek, There are also a couple of ponds, the Mission Pond, where a lot of people like to fish for bluegill and some bass and things like that. Occasionally, ducks are seen in the park. The thing is, we don't have a massive lake like something like maybe Huntsville or Possum Kingdom. These are parks that are situated either they have a massive body of water fully within the park or they are tied onto a much larger reservoir. That is not the case here at Mission Tejas. And so we're just going to say, first off, that accessibility when it comes to ducks out here at Mission Tejas, unfortunately, is not very high. Now, I'm not saying it's impossible to see ducks out here. In fact, this duck right here that we have here, this is the wood duck, and this is the most common species in this family seen here at Mission Tejas. Now, the nice thing about wood ducks is that they are very distinct. I mean, look at this guy. Look at this guy. I mean, I can't think of a more just drastically plumaged duck around here. And here's the thing. This is a male wood duck. Male ducks are called drakes. Female ducks are called hens. Again, just for, if you're very familiar with bird watching, just bear with me here. Maybe there's somebody watching the video who just wants to learn a bit more. Now, the wood duck is the most common duck species out here. I personally have maybe seen wood ducks here at the park maybe 2 or 3 times. But here's the thing. I hear them almost every other month. Now, wood duck calls are not like what you would expect most ducks. They're not quacking like, mallards or things like that. Wood ducks have these kind of wavering yodels and wails and squeals, and they can be very, very vocal. And a lot of times you may hear them and you may never see them. So kind of looking at ducks as a whole, accessibility for them, it's pretty difficult in order to see ducks out here, but again, it's not impossible. Now, when it comes to visual identification, let me introduce you to something called sexual dimorphism. Sexual dimorphism is the differences between male and female within the same species. With ducks, the males tend to be very drastically colored. Their plumage is much brighter than the females, and you'll see this as we go into multiple families. Males oftentimes tend to be more brightly colored because they are there to impress the females and show off their fitness. Females, because they are oftentimes the ones who have to raise the chicks, they have to have more cryptic coloring. They have to blend into their environment a bit better. And this is one of the big things with bird watching. A lot of times, the males of the species are going to be most noticed. Females can provide some pretty tricky identification challenges. Now, with research, you can absolutely start to determine differences. With ducks, a lot of times what you want to do is look at the colors on the speculum. The speculum is about this part of the wing, this lower part right here, and the colors on this during flight can a lot of times help you to determine the species of the duck. Even if they are molting, a lot of times the colors on the speculum can help determine the species. Now, how about vocalizations? Well, like I said, wood ducks are a pretty vocal group, and a lot of times you will hear them and you may not ever see them. But also in terms of behaviors, as some of us may know, while ducks and geese in like a city park may seem quite tame and allow people to get kind of close. Well, first off, when it comes to wildlife, it's always best to give wildlife their space. But wild ducks, they will absolutely give you space, because a lot of times the second you pop your head over the levee, the second they see you, they're off. And so duck viewing is best done on large lakes where you can have quite a bit of distance. And here's the thing, binoculars are an absolute must when you're bird watching. Some birds are very small, and even if they're quite close to you, you may still need that magnification to see differences in plumage and things like that. With all that being said, with ducks are very attractive birds to watch. They're also fairly easy to identify. You can have some issues with hybridization, where different species of ducks will actually hybridize with others. So because some ducks are insanely easy to identify, while other ducks can provide quite a challenge. Accessibility for ducks here at Mission Tejas it's not as easy to see them in other parks. So because of all this, we are going to start off by putting ducks up in C tier. Now, that basically, oh, by the way, in case you're wondering what the tier lists are, D tier simply means that is going to be pretty difficult in order to see and or identify members of this family here at the park. And as it goes up, S tier being they're incredibly common and either very easy to identify or reasonably, easy to identify. Now, moving on though, next up we've got Columbidae. This is the family of doves and pigeons. Here at Mission Tejas, the main dove that we have out here is the mourning dove. Now, accessibility for mourning doves out here in Mission Tejas is very, very, very high, especially when the weather starts to warm up. There are mourning doves all throughout the park, especially during the warmer months. So they are very high tier in terms of their accessibility. Now, in terms of identifying them visually, now they may sometimes appear pretty similar to other birds, but they have a few things that help give them away. For one, whenever they're up in a tree, they kind of have this pretty noticeable teardrop configuration. And also the main thing that they also have going for them is in terms of vocalizations. First off, you hear that, instantly that it's a mourning dove. And also another thing, vocalizations, maybe we should really call this just audio identification, because sometimes birds will make other sounds aside from vocalizations that give them away. Doves and pigeons, all throughout the family of Columbidae, they have very noisy takeoffs. Whenever mourning doves take off, it sounds like it sounds very high pitched, and you could hear the whirring of their wings. That's actually an adaptation. For doves and pigeons, because they are heavily preyed upon by many other animals, when they take off, they have that loud takeoff, which kind of acts as an alarm for other members in the flock. So because of their very distinctive songs and also the very noticeable takeoffs, it's very easy to discern a dove with just their calls and with the sounds that they make. Now, the thing is with doves, they are very, very, very common, like all throughout Texas. And so because of that, maybe some people are like, well, yeah, like it's very easy to watch doves. It's very easy to find them. It's very easy for the most part to identify them, especially if you're in a place that doesn't have too much overlap of multiple species like Mission Tejas. So with that being said, with all the positives they have going for them, but maybe the fact that they might be a little too common, but I don't know. See, this is where subjectivity comes in. This is where it can this really is up to the individual because of, well, just how commonplace they are. I think we can put mourning doves and doves and pigeons as a whole up in A tier. Like very easy to identify. You might just have a few challenges with identification, especially if you're in a place that has sandpipers. Killdeer flying above you, so long as they're not doing their very noticeable call, can be somewhat easy to confuse with a flying dove. Now, coming up next, we have something that is actually not on our bird watching list. This is going to be two families altogether. We have Phasianidae, which in Texas, this is turkeys, pheasants, and prairie chickens. But also tied into this family, we are going to add Odontophoridae, which is the New World quail family. For this part of Texas, this will be bobwhites, the northern bobwhite. Now, these guys are not on our bird watching list for a few reasons. Well, there's really only one big reason. Accessibility for turkey and quail in this park is very, very low. Bobwhite quail populations have been drastically reduced, especially in East Texas. And while turkeys have had a massive comeback, and they are also being introduced in multiple parts of the state, here in Houston County, turkeys are still not quite as common as they are in other counties. There's no open season. For example, there's no open season for turkey hunting in Houston County. Now, regardless of what your views on hunting are, the mere fact that the population cannot support that kind of harvest, at least at the time of recording this video, that turkeys are not incredibly common in the park. I have seen a turkey once in the park, and that was a fantastic viewing thing because members of this family, especially like a strutting turkey, is one of the most memorable things you can see in bird watching. And it's also fairly easy to identify them visually. You might confuse a turkey for a vulture here or there. And with bobwhites also mostly kind of staying, like, because of their small size and their cryptic coloration, sometimes they can be a little hard to see unless you find them out in the open feeding. Because they are fairly easy to identify visually, but also they're super easy to identify with vocalizations. A turkey gobble, I mean, come on, that's one of the easiest, most recognizable calls around. Now, if they were more common here at the park, they would score much, much, much higher. But given the fact that their presence here in this state park is so low, we will have to put both Phasianidae and Odontophoridae down in D tier. Just for this park, it's just because of accessibility. It's just, they're quite difficult to find here in the park. Up next, we have Cuculidae. Now, in Texas, these are cuckoos, roadrunners, and anis. Now, we don't get a lot of roadrunners out here, but this is the yellow-billed cuckoo. Now, these can be fairly common-ish in the area, particularly during summer. These guys are a seasonal bird. You're almost never going to see these here in the park during the winter. So because of that, they're not going to have the highest accessibility, but it's reasonably, it's reasonably easy to come into a place where there are cuckoos nearby. Now, they can be a little secretive. Occasionally, yeah, you will see a cuckoo flying out into the open. But the thing is, because of their shape, sometimes they could be a little easy to confuse with other birds, especially if you're in a place that has both the yellow-billed cuckoo and the black-bill cuckoo. Those two species are incredibly similar. But around here, we mostly just have the yellow-bill. Now, how are their vocalizations, though? Well, the call, that rattling call of a cuckoo that you usually hear in riparian areas. And by the way, riparian means it's kind of down by the river. There's a lot larger hardwood trees down there. These are like riverside habitats. The rattling and borderline gurgling calls of the yellow-billed cuckoo are very distinct. The only thing is you might confuse that for a kingfisher, but once you know what you're listening for, here's the thing with bird watching. Once you know what you're looking for, or once you know what you're listening for, you will be amazed by how much you can't unhear or unsee or anything like that. Once you learn it, it can really stick with you. But where do cuckoos fit in the tier list? Well, they make for some pretty cool viewing, and they are reasonably easy to kind of stumble across or to hear calling. Now, because of their secretive nature, and also the main thing is that they are seasonal in the area, I don't think they can quite make it up to S tier, but they are still reasonably accessible and reasonably easy to see and to identify. That's the main thing, is identifying it, and they're not exactly rare in the area. I think they are solid A tier on this list. Up next, we got Trochilidae, which is the hummingbird family. Now, usually, we want to talk accessibility and all that, but like, first off, let's address the elephant in the room. Hummingbirds are a lot of fun to watch, but here's the thing. You usually need feeders in order to attract them to your location. If you're out on the trail and obviously there's no bird feeders set up, there's no nectar feeders that hummingbirds need to use. These guys, they are not necessarily the easiest to stumble across. Now, the nice thing, well, first off, what we have here, this is the ruby-throated hummingbird, and it's by far the most common hummingbird in this area. There's only one other hummingbird that occasionally can be seen out here. That is the rufous hummingbird. They mostly kind of pass through the area during migration. A few areas they may winter in that kind of locale. Now, obviously, because of their name, rufous hummingbirds tend to have a slightly different color scheme. They also sound kind of similar to ruby throats, but given that ruby throats are so much more significantly common in the area, that's mainly what we're going to be gauging this off of. Now, how easy is it to identify a ruby throat when it's buzzing right next to you? Well, here's the thing. It's usually like if they're right up in your face, they do that vroom, and then they head out. If you get a good enough look while they're doing that, it could be so easy. You're like, oh, that's a hummingbird. Like, so easy. But here's the thing. If you see them off at a distance, or if you see them dashing between flowers and maybe the lighting's not quite right, I have had people confuse hummingbirds for just bumblebees or those really big moths or vice versa. So they are very easy to identify. And also those little cackles that they do is also pretty easy to identify. And just the fact that hummingbirds also around here at the park, they tend to hang out in edge habitats. If you're like in a good mode area and you have woods like kind of off to your side, a lot of times you can see hummingbirds kind of hovering along the edges of those. So I will go ahead and just because sometimes you may want feeders in order to really see them, but when you're out on the trails, there's not really going to be any feeders out. We'll just put hummingbirds up in A tier. Oh, now up next, we got Cathartidae. These are the New World vultures. What we have pictured here is a black vulture. We also have turkey vultures out here. Vultures. Now, here's the thing. In terms of accessibility, it is insanely easy to see vultures. They're everywhere. Like, it's very easy to come across vultures, and they're also fairly easy to identify. The only thing is if you see a turkey vulture on the side of the road, and if you're being a good driver, you're not staring at it, you just kind of see out of the corner of your eye, you might mistake it for an actual turkey. But for the most part, vultures are fairly easy to identify. Now, how about their vocalizations, though? Well, for the most part, vultures are pretty silent. They don't have songs, and sometimes they may call a bit near the nest. Black vultures will occasionally do this, like this little call, but it's not very common, and it's not very loud. But there is one thing that you can use. Black vultures, when they flap over you, their wings are pretty loud. You can actually hear like an audible. And so because of that, you may get like one hint that a vulture is flying right above you. But, the fact that you are mostly going to be using, sight in order to know if there's vultures nearby. But the fact that they tend to perch pretty high up on trees and also will be soaring up on the thermals, that can make it easier. The main thing is, everyone is like, hey, yeah, but we can see vultures literally anywhere. But because of that, like it's, that appeal can sometimes really mess with some of the ranking on a vulture. But with that being said, though, their ease of identifications and their abundance, and also the fact that vultures, I will say this, even if there's not much of an appeal for vultures, they are still incredibly important to our ecosystems. You know, they are dead ends for many diseases. They help break down, decompose, materials all throughout the state. But, it's a bird watching list, like not necessarily an ecology tier list. I think merely just for the fact that sometimes the trees out here in the park, since most of it is forest, it can sometimes, hamper viewing. I think we are just going to put vultures up at B tier. They're still very good for bird watching. It's just maybe some people are not necessarily going out there looking for them. Oh, the next up. Now we have kind of the opposite thing. Now, who here has never been excited by seeing a hawk up on a telephone pole? Like on a road trip, someone goes, hawk! Whoop. Now, this is Accipitridae. This includes eagles and kites as well. Now, here at Mission Tejas, one of the most common hawks you see here pictured is the red-shouldered hawk. Now, here at Mission Tejas, we also got Mississippi kites, Cooper's hawks, and red-tailed hawks occasionally. Now, where do these guys fall on the tier list? Well, first off, they are quite accessible. It's pretty easy to see them up on the telephone lines, and a lot of people really want to see them. They have some pretty distinctive calls and vocalizations. If you're walking through the woods, you're almost guaranteed to hear here, here, here. You'll hear the red-shouldered hawk making his calls. The main thing that can be a little tricky is there are several hawk species that are actually incredibly similar that can actually make for some difficult identifications. I mentioned the Cooper's hawk, and there's also the sharp-shinned hawk. Now, they're not as common in the area, but they still can be found, and the two species are incredibly similar. To someone who's off with bird watching, especially the fact that stuff like the red tail hawk can oftentimes have some slightly different plumages. It can allow for some semi-difficult identification challenges. But with that being said, they're really not too hard to identify once you have kind of the standards, once you have some of the basics lined up. And also, hawks are very popular for a reason. They are beautiful, stately birds. And here's the thing, we may not really go too much into the negative appeal, but something that has a very high appeal for a wide range of people is definitely going to impact it on the list. I think simply just because of some of the identification issues, it may keep hawks out of S tier, but they are still very high up there. Now, next we have another family that is not on our birdwatching checklist for the state park, but I have included owls for the tier list. Now, we are actually combining two different families here. Most owls are in the family Strigidae, but barn owls are in their own separate family, Titanidae. But just for the sake of the tier list, I have combined the two for one entry. Now, they're not on our birdwatching checklist, and here's the thing. At the time of recording, there is no overnight camping here at the state park, and so it can be very difficult in order to see these guys. But whenever we open up for overnight camping, if you're out here, it's very likely that you may hear some of these. The guy pictured here is the most common owl in the area. This is the barred owl. Now, barred owls can also be somewhat active during the day as well. And barred owls, they have that they may have that "who cooks for you" call. But lots of other owls have very distinctive calls. The barn owl doesn't necessarily hoot, he shrieks. Now, whenever owls call, they are incredibly easy to identify. And yes, it's the fact that they are nocturnal maybe knocks down their accessibility a bit. And that's the main thing. Simply with the fact that they are nocturnal and you have to be out at night in order to hear them. And that is the only reason that I feel owls cannot necessarily be up in S tier, but they are still very high up there. Up next, we got Piccidae. These are the woodpeckers. Now, Mission Tejas has a very wide range of woodpeckers. One of the most common ones that we have out here, this is the pileated woodpecker. Some people say pileated, some people say this, some people say apricot, some people say apricot, but we have all sorts of woodpeckers out here all throughout the year. You can see pileated. We also have redhead woodpeckers, red-bellied woodpeckers, flickers, downy woodpeckers, and hairy woodpeckers. And even during the winter, we get a migratory species called the yellow-bellied sapsucker. Now, woodpeckers are very fun to watch. They are oftentimes seen flitting from tree to tree, and it's very entertaining to watch them. They are also incredibly vocal, and that's why their vocalizations definitely help them on the tier list. And several species are incredibly distinct and easy to identify. Even the pileated woodpecker you can determine the sex of the woodpecker by looking at the color of the stripe that is underneath the eye. This guy has some red on there, so that means that he is a male. Females, it'll be all black. So because they are very active, they are very vocal, they're very fun to watch, and several of them are very easy to identify. They're very high on the Mission Tejas tier list, especially with the fact that there are so many species that are active here year round. Now, you will come up against a few identification challenges, particularly the downy woodpecker and the hairy woodpecker both look incredibly visually similar. Usually, if you look at the size of the beak and some of the facial structures on there, you can actually tell the difference. But even with that being a very slight kind of hit on in terms of ease of identification, woodpeckers are still just so common and popular and also just so diverse out here that I think woodpeckers are going to be our very first S tier and when it comes to bird watching. Now, next up, we've got Tyrannidae. These are the Tyrant Flycatchers. Now, Tyrant Flycatchers, we got several kinds out here. The guy that is shown here, this is the Eastern Phoebe. Now, the Phoebe is one of the most common bird songs that you can hear out in the woods. Most people have heard. I can't do it. I can't do it. But the Eastern Phoebe is only one of the several types of flycatchers that we have out here. We got Eastern Kingbirds. There's also the Acadian flycatcher. We also have Eastern Wood Peewees. Now, here's the thing. Tyrannids tend to be fairly accessible, especially during the summer. We get a lot of migratory species that come in, and Phoebes can be roughly found throughout here year round, although they still tend to be a bit more common during the summer. So they're reasonably accessible, and they are very vocal, and they are very fun to watch, especially those of you who have seen the scissortail flycatcher is another tyrant flycatcher in this family. Or out west, there's also the vermilion flycatcher, which is a very beautiful bird. But here's the thing. The main thing that can make this family tricky is that some of the genera, the genuses in this family, are some of the most difficult to identify species ever. Empidonax, especially, like the Acadian flycatcher, these birds look entirely similar to a lot of other species within the same genus, to the point where sometimes biologists need to actually hold them in hand and look under their beaks at beak sizes and lengths. That is very difficult to see out in the field. But you also have very easy to identify birds like the aforementioned scissortail flycatcher and vermilion flycatcher. Also, it's really cool to see sallying behavior from flycatchers. They're called flycatchers because several species will post up on the branch of a tree and they will wait for a flying insect to come by, and you'll see them like going out and fluttering, and you'll see them jinking and dodging, and then they'll have something in their mouth and then they'll fly back to their perch. This behavior is not only fun to watch, it can actually be a very good identifier. Watching how a bird feeds can be a fantastic way to help identify what family it belongs to. Now, I think they are very fun to watch, but because of that, and also with the drawbacks of some seasonalities and also some difficulty in identifications, even some of their vocalizations can sound pretty similar to others. I think these guys are another B tier family. Now, up next, we got Virionidae. We got Vireos. The Vireos, most of our Vireos are seasonal. During the summer or spring especially, we get a whole lot of different kinds of vireos out here. Vireos, oftentimes, these are small birds that like to hang out in the shrubbery. These guys feed by gleaning. What that means is they kind of creep slowly along the branches and they just kind of poke under, and they kind of just eat insects off of the bottom of leaves and things like that. One word I've heard a lot of bird watchers and biologists say when it comes to vireos is deliberate. They can be very just calculating almost with their movements. Now, one thing that vireos definitely have going for them is the fact that they are very continuous when they sing. Like, they will keep singing, keep singing. Some species, like this guy here, this is the white-eyed vireo. This is one of the most common vireos we have out here, and even at the time of recording, I can hear at least 2 other species that are very common and also on our bird watching checklist, the yellow-throated vireo and the red-eyed vireo. Now, these guys, they sing a lot and they can sing continuously, and that definitely helps with their identification. The main thing that can kind of keep vireos from being very, very high on the list is some species look very similar not only to other species of vireo, but even to other birds and other families. The Bell's vireo or the Hutton's vireo, now, while they're not the most common vireos around here, they can provide some identification challenges. So because of these identification challenges, and also due to most of their seasonality, I think that kind of keeps them from getting to the very top of the tier list, but they are still very solid. They're very fun to listen to, and they can be very rewarding to come across, especially here at the park when you could just hear them singing all throughout the forest. Now, up next, we got Corvidae. We got the blue jay right here, but the Corvidae also includes crows and ravens and magpies. Now, out here at Mission Tejas, blue jays and American crows are both insanely common year-round throughout the park. Accessibility, it's pretty hard to find anything more accessible than blue jays and crows. They are very easy to identify visually. Sometimes some people can confuse a crow for a black vulture, but when you see it up close, it's pretty easy to tell. Crows have a fully feathered head. Black vultures have the exposed head, and they're significantly larger. They're also very easy to determine with vocalizations. Both species are incredibly vocal, and they both have very wide ranges of vocalizations, and also just by their intelligence is very fascinating to see and watch them, and you may see some behaviors that really amaze you. So because of all this, I think these guys are pretty easy S tier. They are very entertaining to watch, they're very easy to identify, and they are very accessible here at the park. Up next, we got Parody. Now, pictured here, we have the Carolina chickadee. We also have another species out here, the tufted titmouse. Here in Texas, this is mainly what this family is represented, is chickadees and titmice. Both species are very common here in the park, and also they are very vocal. A lot of times you can hear them all throughout, and they can be reasonably easy to identify. There's really only a couple of things that might keep them from S tier. Is one, the scolding call that chickadees and titmice both do, that like that little scolding call can be a little difficult to identify sometimes. And also, yes, they are very active and they sometimes can get a lot closer to people than other birds simply because of their size. If they're not out in the open, they can be kind of tricky to identify. I might just be, nitpicking here, but I think those two things can kind of keep them out from being in S tier. I personally, I will put these up in A tier though. They're still very solid. And again, you may disagree here. I know quite a few people would put these guys up in S tier. Completely understand that. And if you disagree, please let us know in the comments. Let's have a discussion about it. Up next, we got Regulidae. Now, these are the kinglets. These are very small but active and vocal birds. Pictured here, we have the ruby-crowned kinglet. We also occasionally get golden crowns out here as well. Now, the kinglet is mostly kind of seasonal. They're mostly here during the winter, but come springtime, they can start calling, and their calls are fairly easy to remember or fairly easy to determine. Once you hear it, you know it. And also, a big caveat here. Yes, Merlin exists. Now, for those of you who are new to bird watching, maybe don't know this, there is a really good app that you can get called Merlin, where you simply start recording and it will hear off in the distance the birds are singing, and providing your location and what time of year it is can actually help show exactly what birds could be calling. Now, sometimes Merlin can be tricked, by mockingbirds. And yes, you can see the birds that are left. Unfortunately, mockingbirds are just not on this list. If you want to see them, you know what to do. But sometimes with a mockingbird, because their songs have borrowed songs from so many other species, it can trick Merlin into revealing a bird that is not there. And also sometimes a bird that you can obviously hear, sometimes your phone just doesn't quite pick it up. And so it doesn't show on the app. But, that's the Merlin caveat there. With that being said, getting back into kinglets, these guys are widespread, but given the fact they are kind of seasonal, and also these are pretty small birds. And as you see the crown that this guy has, a lot of times, if the crown is not visible, they can easily be confused for other birds, especially immatures. And so because of that, there is that slight knock to them with their seasonality, and also with the fact that they can be a little hard to identify if they're not calling right next to you, and if the crest is not very noticeable, which a lot of times it is not as pronounced as it is in this photo. But I think with all that being said, they're still also very solid, so this makes for another A tier. Up next, we got Citidae. These are the nuthatches, and also we are going to be combining another family. Let's see if I can pronounce this. Certhiidae or Curthiidae or Curthiidae. There's going to be different pronunciations, but that's the creeper family. Oh, man. But, sorry, I just had to do it. But out here at Mission Tejas, we have 3 kind of nuthatches. The 3 main nuthatches found throughout this part of Texas all can be seen here at the park. And the brown-headed nuthatch, the guy that is pictured right here, can be actually seen throughout the park, and especially heard throughout the park throughout the entire year. Now, these guys, I love nuthatches personally, but let's try to put the bias aside and let's actually look at them somewhat objectively. How is their accessibility? Well, they are fairly accessible. Brown-headed nuthatches especially are very common here in the park. And also the white-breasted and red-breasted nuthatches can be seen and heard throughout the park occasionally as well. Also, creepers can be seen here in the park as well. And all their behaviors, these little acrobatic birds, the nuthatches will hang out at the very tops of the trees, while creepers, you can see them. They're more like this brown bird that sometimes you might have seen them throughout the winter in the forest. You see this brown bird that has this really high warbling call that's like zigzagging up a tree, and it flits off to another tree, but then lands at the bottom and keeps working its way up. That's a brown creeper. Now, because these guys, simply because of their behaviors, and also the nuthatches all look quite different and even sound different from each other, that makes identification pretty easy for them. And even though brown creepers, they have a very high-pitched call, and if you are hard of hearing, you may actually have some difficulty in hearing it, but because of their very active lifestyle, I think all those things combined, I think nuthatches and creepers go up into S tier. Now, the next family we have Troglodytidae. These are the wrens. Now, pictured here is the most common wren here at the park, the Carolina wren. Now, the Carolina wren's song is one of the most familiar songs that you will see. And this time of year, Carolina wrens are hip-hopping everywhere around the buildings, trying to build their nests and gather materials. And they can build their nests in some really weird places. Now, there are other species of wrens that are also found throughout the park, mostly during the winter. But the thing with wrens, because they are so accessible and they can be fairly easy to identify, especially if there's only one kind of wren in the area, the Carolina wren, the other species can look somewhat similar, but once you really kind of look into it and know what to look for, you can see different behaviors and different habitat preference, and also what part of the state you're in and what time of year it is. All these are fantastic ways to help with identification. Also, Merlin, let's be real, Merlin makes song identification pretty simple. Now, a lot of wrens will prefer to call from concealed areas, so just kind of keep that in mind. But yeah, the Carolina wren, especially with how visible they are and how common they are, I think with all this, even with some of the identification issues that you may have with a few species, I think these guys are another A tier family. Now, up next, oh boy. Up next is Emberizidae, the New World sparrows. Now, if you know, you know. Now, like I said, there's no bad birds, but here's the thing. Sparrows are among the most notoriously difficult to identify species around. Many birders will simply call them the little brown birds because a lot of their plumages can look insanely similar. Now, the guy pictured here is a chipping sparrow, and these are very common on the roads. Now, until you start, driving past them or walking by them. And also, because of their behavior, they may show up on the roads just foraging around looking for seeds, but their skittish behavior can make them pretty hard to identify. But there are also dark-eyed juncos here in Mission Tejas State Park. We also got white-throated sparrows in the eastern towhee. Now, sometimes, here's the thing, when it comes to vocalizations, if the sparrow is singing, then this can actually be a pretty good way to determine what kind of species it is that you're either seeing or hearing. But that's the thing, if it's singing, a lot of times they usually just call, and there's a big difference between calling and singing. A song is something that a sparrow or really a bird is up there either really announcing its presence. It's much more long and complex. It has very obvious notes for the most part. But calls are just quick little, what? That? Like these are much shorter kind of sudden calls. And the thing is, the calls that a lot of sparrows do, just those little, I can't make it, but those little chips and tinks, they can sound incredibly similar, not just to each other, but to a lot of other songbirds. And so because of all that, because of the difficulty in identifying them. Now, here's the thing. If you do research into it, you can start to determine differences between different genera, the differences between Amydromus or many of the other species or the different genus that are found in the family. You can at least start to whittle things down. And again, use habitat preference, use location, and use time of year. And another thing you can also use is how the sparrow takes off. Some sparrows will immediately dip down into cover. Some will just kind of fly really low. Some will actually just fly straight up almost. And so these sort of behaviors are another thing that you can use to help determine the species. But with all this being said, they are very accessible, and there is a wide variety of sparrows that you can find. But because of the issue of identification, I think sparrows, they go up in C tier simply because of the difficulty with identifying. Now, up next, we got Parulidae. This is the wood warbler family, or just warblers. Now, this guy right here is a pine warbler. Now, they are by far one of the most common warblers found throughout the park. Unlike a lot of other warblers, which are mostly, seasonal, the majority of which they're here during the spring, summer breeding season, like the hooded warbler and the northern parula. We also get other species like the yellow-rumped warbler and the orange-crowned warbler. We also sometimes can see the black and white warbler out here. Now, this family is massive. It's insanely diverse. You can have almost every color shade of bird imaginable. And some warbler, for those of y'all down in North or Central Texas, you guys all know about the golden-cheeked warbler, which is one of the most highly sought-after birds by birders anywhere. This family is very popular for a reason, with all the variety that they can have and just the beautiful colors and just the sheer, just what species am I looking at here? And here's the thing. We had talked about sexual dimorphism in females, being kind of harder to identify. In warblers, yeah, this is still very much the case, but even the females can look distinct enough from other females. Yes, their plumage is much more muted, but they actually still have a lot of characteristics that can help distinguish them from other warblers. So with all that being said, and also the fact that their singing is, they can sometimes sing continuously. Now, the thing is, you kind of do need Merlin for these guys. You don't necessarily need it, but Merlin is a really good tool to use because some of these birds can sound very similar. Their songs can follow kind of very similar phrases. So I would definitely recommend something like Merlin to help with that. But because of that, and also just for the pine warbler alone that is found throughout the park throughout the year, just because of that excellent accessibility. And yeah, you may just have some slight identification, challenges here and there, but just with all the bonuses that they have, I think warblers do also go up into A tier. Now, finally, well, we're getting down to it. And yes, I know everyone's probably wondering, hey, where are the thrushes? Where are the mimics? Where's the gnatcatchers? No finches, Again, if you want to see a video where we go into those, just let us know in the comment section. By the way, if you are still here with us, thank you so much for watching this video. Not over yet. I know we got one more family to get into. Actually, technically, this will be two families all in one. But if you want to see other state parks doing their own bird watching tier lists, or if you want to see other sort of tier lists from different park staff, just let us know in the comments section. But finally, the last family, and like I said, it's technically two families that we're going to go into here. We have Cardinalidae. Now, this will include cardinals and buntings, but we're also going to be combining Thropidae in with this family. These are the Tanagers. Now, cardinals are some of the most easily recognizable birds. Even the females are still very easily recognizable if you can get a good look at them. They are very familiar. They're very vocal. Out here at Mission Tejas, we also have the indigo bunting, which is quite common in the wooded areas during the summer. Also, if you listen, you can hear the summer tanager making some songs. And the songs of all these birds is very, well, varied. But, Merlin can also help with that. But ease of identification, the males of these species, you also have stuff like the painted bunting, which is one of the most beautiful birds that you'll ever see. These families, by the way, just as a whole, some of the most beautiful birds that you'll ever see, the most drastically plumaged birds ever. But also, like, just in terms of accessibility, for cardinals alone, these guys are very, very high in accessibility. Now, yes, you will get some, identification challenges here and there, but for the sheer beauty that these birds provide and the ease of identification that at least the males can offer, and the females too, again, you just have to dig into it. Once the bird watching bug bites you, it bites hard. But with the sheer accessibility and the beauty that these birds offer, I think that alone is going to make this family go up into S tier. This is the Mission Tejas bird watching tier list. Again, we did not rank this based on just what's a bad bird for watching. We have looked at accessibility and ease of identification, but what do you think of this? Do you agree with this list? Do you disagree? I'm sure if you disagree, just let us know in the comments. And if you like the video, you know what to do with that like button and the subscription button and all that stuff. If you've been on YouTube for more than a few years, you already know all about it. So we're not going to get too much into that. But if you want to see other state parks show their birdwatching tier lists, if you want to see another birdwatching tier list where we go into thrushes, into the icterids or things like that, you know how to let us know. Anyway, thank you so much for watching. We will see y'all out there. Remember, life is better outside.